I would never trust that. It took me a while to trust Uber, and it took me longer to trust Airbnb. But the millennials trust digital world differently. And digital money is all about trust. Now, I know about gold and I know about US dollars. It's all about trust.
Welcome to Rethinking the Dollar. Today I'm excited to have my guest, Mr. Frank Holmes, the chairman of HIVE Blockchain Technologies, a blockchain infrastructure company that bridges blockchain and cryptocurrencies to traditional capital markets. Today he's going to share his recent projects out in the Scandinavian area, as well as share his thoughts on the economy. So, Mr. Holmes, welcome to Rethinking the Dollar.
Well, thank you. It's the opportunity to share my thoughts and experiences with y'all.
Well, I'm looking forward to having you join us and share your thoughts on the cryptocurrency space, because a lot of the millennial generation especially is really excited about what's happening and the opportunities in the future. And so your company is kind of bridging the gap between allowing money to get in there, as well as you guys are creating, as you say, I've heard you mention fresh tokens. And so looking to find out more about that. But before we dive into the specifics of the cryptocurrency sector, the show is called Rethinking a Dollar. So I usually start off with some Rethinking a Dollar questions. And the first question is, what comes to mind when Frank Holmes hears the words rethinking the dollar?
Well, it's amazing to me that 10-year government bonds is 310, screaming at these high levels, and the dollar is still on a relative basis very weak. Germany is 50 basis points, euro. Japan is 5 basis points, and you would think they'd be crashing relative to the US dollar soaring. So I think that over the next 3 months to 6 months, this rally in the dollar is going to peak because rates are going to peak. We look at what's called global PMIs. I write about them every month. Global PMIs are forward-looking. They're 6 months. They get a reset every month to where the economy is going, expected to be in 6 months. It's very, very helpful to look for copper, oil, steel prices. They all correlate very nicely with PMI. Whereas GDP is looking behind us. So PMIs have peaked. They're coming down. They're not falling. So I think that another decline this summer versus last year was rallying. We'll have a slowdown in the dollar. The dollar starts to pivot to come down.
Fair enough. Now, heading into the PMI aspect of things, I noticed there's a lot of indicators as well as measurements that people utilize to kind of predict the overall health of the economy. Now, based upon the PMIs and the things that you're familiar with, would you say that we are approaching a recession or currently in a recession? What are your measurements on that?
We're not approaching a recession. We're approaching a long pause. And I think that the big part is what Trump is doing, besides having foot and mouth syndrome of just tweeting the wrong things at the wrong time. He is battling the Beltway Party. And I think it was really interesting because the people don't like to hear the deep party, etc. But when I was last year at the Salt Hedge Fund conference, Bernanke said that he is like Jimmy Carter. And I said, and the whole audience couldn't believe that. And he said, yes, anytime the president takes on the Beltway Party, that is entrenched bureaucrats, and you have entrenched bureaucrats that love more regulations and rules in any department because they employ more people, therefore more tax dollars goes toward employing them, that they then seem to partner with these lobbyists, and there's lots of leaks going against the president. So it doesn't matter if the president's a Democrat or Republican, you don't take on the Beltway Party. Right. And he doesn't care. So he's doing it. And one of the big things I discovered going to Washington is he changed the EPA, and he told the EPA if they don't follow Obama's checklist, which he put in, then they have to report to the Department of Justice and the FBI why they're not approving fixing up bridges, fixing up highways, etc. And so all of a sudden now we have an infrastructure boom taking place. So I think that this is the only sort of positive parts that I see.
Right. Now you say a pause, so not a recession, but a pause. Can you go into a little bit more information as to what a pause is?
So a PMI would be that they're going to fall below 50. PMI would be Purchasing Manufacturing Index. It starts to slow down dramatically and it starts falling, and then above 50 globally is positive and constructive. Now, another thing that can impact the dollar is what do the Europeans do over us boycotting or turning against Iran. I think that Trump's thought process is able to push back North Korea into resolving issues by being tough guy with them. Now, if he goes after Syria, then will Iran stop all their troublemaking? But now Europe is saying that they're going to allow their oil trading to settle in euros, not U.S. dollars. Right. That could be a factor that could hurt the U.S. dollar. And so how that unfolds, I don't know, but I do know that it's interesting dynamics, capital markets, and it's the reason why always I say you should have 10% weighting in gold and rebalance every year. If you're more timely, rebalance once a quarter, and it works. This year, bullion is up versus the S&P. Last year, bullion was up over 13%, and since the year 2000, bullion is up 200% over the S&P 500. Yeah. So having a weighting in it is only prudent.
Now, that's very true there. Thank you for sharing that. Now, one of the concerns that I often mention about is the idea of the mainstream narrative over the last, say, 6-7 years, even including the last administration, was that we're in a economic recovery. So it went from the words economic recovery to now it's an economic expansion. And so this is one of the longest periods of there being an expansion without some type of correction. So do you foresee a correction in regards to, I was actually watching a video earlier. A hedge fund gentleman mentioned that a correction could be 50% drop in the stock market. And then you mentioned the bond market earlier. Are we in territory that people should be aware of that is quite alarming in comparison to the worst case scenario that a lot of people do predict?
Well, there's no doubt we're going to get corrections because of the cyclical nature, but we do have lots of change globally. And so how this gets elongated, but we're going to right now fight with the VIX is a measure of the volatility. And the VIX is basically, you got to think of this huge pool of cash or money as water, and it pivots. So one of the parts of the driving the stock market has been zero interest rates. So why would you buy bonds with zero interest rates when you could buy stocks paying you a 2% dividend yield? And as dividend yields of stocks start to rise, now interest rates rising, you saw this year VIX took off when the 10-year government yield went above the S&P dividend. You saw the 5-year. So the 10-year was actually last September, then this year the 5-year and the 2-year. So today, money is saying, well, why would I take risk when I can buy a 2-year government bond and get a guaranteed rate of return without losing my principal and get a higher dividend than the S&P 500? So the S&P growth and dividend yield is very important in this trade-off of money flows by pension funds and institutions. And they have a quant model that goes back and forth. So 2-year, 5-year, 10-year versus the dividend yield of the S&P 500. And what do we have now? The 2-year yield is above the S&P dividend. Immediately the VIX started going up and down. It starts like snowboarding, and you're hitting flats. And that's what we're dealing with. That doesn't mean the overall economy is slowing down. The stock market is finding it skittish. The overall economy still remains healthy.
Right. Very good point there. Now, let's transition a little bit because we're talking a lot about Wall Street area, the financial sector, where there's a lot of people who actually are aware of how these markets operate, rather. But then you go to the main street where gentlemen or people are not well knowledgeable on markets or whatnot. And then we talk about just the cost of living, just the average person being able to bring home a decent paycheck and the crunch that they're probably feeling. And so from an inflation standpoint and a cost of living standpoint, I recently did a video talking about how a lot of statistics are showing that because disposable income isn't as plentiful as it was, a lot of people are relying upon credit, and then they're getting themselves into debt and things like that. Can you share with us your thoughts on how the economy for your average worker might not be as good it is for those that are knowledgeable of the markets and involved in the market sector?
Well, absolutely. And I've written about this and in my blog that's read in 180 countries. I have about 40,000 weekly readers. And I've written that inflation is understated. If we went and used the factors for 1980 inflation, what makes a determination, we'd be over 10% inflation. If we use the 1990 factors, we would be 8% inflation. There is no way inflation is running at 2.3%, 2.5%. That's BS. Now, I launched the JETS ETF, listed on the New York Stock Exchange. And why did I do that? Because I'm a global traveler. I saw all these mega mergers. Most of the airlines were in bankruptcy outside of Southwest Airlines. And what did you see? You saw 25% less optionality for flights, work wherever you go, when you want to go, and a 300% increase in the cost of flying. Inflation is not growing at 3%. Right. That's just BS. And so the Fed in New York has come up with its own indicator, and their inflationary numbers are higher. I've seen for the past 20 years what my legal bills have been. I see what my regulatory filings have been. There is no way my legal filings have been running at a 3% inflationary rate or a 2% inflationary rate. They're running like a 6% CAGR. And some of my other ones are running at a 15% inflationary rate. I know that the lawyers for the trust, they always had embedded 3% every year rising price on their legal bill. So they're so misconstrued out there. Talk about fake news is the factors going to CPI. Now that's fake news. Right. And so your listeners know that. And I think what's really interesting is millennials have come along at a Poly conference I was at. I mean, a Poly Capital were speaking, and the partner said that Ethereum created 10,000 millennial millionaires.
Really?
10,000.
10,000.
So what is that new world? And there's a new world that's happening, and then between the old world and gold. And I think it's interesting. Gold is at 1,900, is corrected to 1,000, back to 1,300 and change. If you did the real inflationary rate and you looked at where gold should be, it should be more like 7,000.
Wow. Now, speaking of gold and silver, before we get into the cryptocurrency sector, and so one of the things you hinted at earlier is the importance of having a little bit of your portfolio allocated in precious metals. Now, do you ever follow the ratio aspect as far as like mining wise, because it comes out the ground at 1 to 9, but yet its ratio trading is 1 to 70, whatever it might be now. I don't tend to follow it because I think it's more important about how much do you have as opposed to the actual price now. So do you pay attention to the actual price, the ratio? How do you measure the amount that you should accumulate for your own personal storage?
Well, I have a matrix, so it's not one factor. And you do look at, in the world of quant investing, is based on two principles of physics. Momentum, inertia, makes you a growth momentum investor, versus mean reversion, laws of gravity. Things will always revert to the long-term mean. And that's a growth investor. Value investor. A value investor is looking for a deep discount. The things always will go back to the mean. So I try to have factors that look at both. And when I've launched ETFs that are based on these quant factors, which I launched JETS on, it's done exactly what it said it was going to do. And this time last year, I launched GoAU on New York. It's a smart beta gold ETF for gold stocks. And it's doing that. So I think that when we talk about what's your allocation, there's no one factor. I use a combination of several factors to look for that balance.
Interesting. Fair enough there. Now, last question before we get into cryptocurrencies. I'm excited to hear about what's going on with you guys at Hive. But yet, because we're rethinking a dollar, I always ask this question as far as the future outlook of the Federal Reserve note as a current reserve currency. Now, if you were to guess, of course, no one knows, but how and where do you see the Federal Reserve note on a global scale, 5, 10, say 15 years from now? Will it still carry the amount of weight that it carries now as far as being an international medium of exchange?
Well, I think they have to really be sensitive of the second largest GDP in the world, and that is China. When we write about, talk about Russia, I just wrote a piece on Russia versus Texas. And our GDP per capita is massively greater than anything in Russia. And they're the biggest exporter of energy in the world, and all the corruption and inefficiency that take place. So I don't think Russia steals the center stage of media because they go in and bomb Syria and they use their technology. They predominantly export energy and guns and weapons. That's what they export. No cars, nothing else. Or hackers. They have a lot of PhDs that are great coders, very mathematical oriented economy. But I think that Russia may politically grab center stage, but really economically, one has to really respect what China's doing. And now China's coming out with its own futures for oil trading. All oil trading is done in US dollars, but now it's going to be done in renminbi. What took place with this recent news coming out from the FT on Europe maybe partnering with Iran to use euros to trade oil. they're the things that would sort of undermine the overall U.S. dollar as a medium of exchange. But I think the fact that America has the rule of law, I think that America has what's really important in my experience as a global investor is that we all have families and we all have family values. And you hear this as family values. In Latin America, they have family values. In Africa, they have really strong family values. But you know what they lack? Civic values. Russia doesn't have civic values. So what makes civic values? If your sons are in Boy Scouts, Girls and Girl Guides, you're a member of Rotary, you're a member of the Lions Club, all these things create a value of civic. Or you're going to buy some of the local schools tax-free bonds because you want to build a new gym so your school can compete better against another gym. Only happens in America.
Yeah.
It's so unique and positive about the American system, and when you compare to other places. So I don't think that Iran or Russia or Latin America, these other places, they don't have the civic values. The British have civic values. The Canadians have civic values. The Australians have civic values. And we're all one thing common is common law. And common law is the most creative law for the formation of capital. So I think it's going to be a lot longer before the dollar loses its eminence. We have the most powerful military. That's very important. And if you take a look what the Chinese did to launch the Shanghai Stock Exchange, they completely copied Hong Kong, which is based on common law. So rule of law. So how does a little city like Hong Kong have the most millionaires per 10 people? How does Singapore, which was the same, actually more destitute than Havana, Cuba, the same time 50 years ago, and today its GDP capital rivals the world because they have common law, the structure. So I don't think you're going to dismantle the U.S. dollar so quickly as some people have, but it's really prudent to have gold and silver. And now what's evolving is having some exposure. Is more speculative, is some cryptocurrency.
Very good point there. Very good transition into cryptocurrency. So HIVE Blockchain Technologies. And so you come from mutual funds background and you're CEO of US Investor Global. So how did you get involved with the cryptocurrency space is the question.
Well, my biggest critics have been I'm a gold fund guy. And so I've written books on gold and gold investing, and I've been on the ground floor of the creation of so many great gold mining companies, going back to Barrick. I was the market maker in Toronto. I mean, you can tell by my accent, I'm a Texan. Y'all come back, eh? And so I've been living here almost 30 years in San Antonio. And so what I love is recognizing this sort of teasing me about being a gold investor and going into the crypto world. And a lot came from listening to millennials. Your son, you've got to listen to your son. You know, what are they doing and why? And you can question their peers, etc., but how they're using technology. So my godson, who got drafted by the New York Rangers and made a decision after one concussion to go get his MBA and has made millions of dollars in this crypto space, was showing me, Uncle Frank, you got to look at this thing called Tinder, how you pick up dates. And I said, really? He said, yes, no, yes. I would never trust that. It took me a while to trust Uber. And it took me longer to trust Airbnb. But the millennials trust digital world differently. And digital money is all about trust. Now, I know about gold and I know about US dollars. It's all about trust. Can I trust the integrity of this? And Bitcoin has been a masterful in creating the new digital world, a new form of trusting of an asset. With 12,000 nodes around the world sponsoring and mining these coins, that's a huge ecosystem. And to think that Ethereum, with 30,000 almost like religious coding devotees around the world supporting the Ethereum network, with only 7 people in their foundation. Just think of having a congregation this big. It's huge. Right. So there's something else happening on this element of trust. And I was trying to launch an ETF. Like I mentioned, I launched JETS, I launched GoAU. Now I want to launch something in the Bitcoin, Ethereum space. And I discovered very quickly at $1,000 an hour legal bills, it ain't happening. The SEC, because of anti-money laundering laws and KYC, know your client, are going to be embarrassed with some hacker getting paid with Bitcoins and bragging that those Bitcoins showed up in a New York listed vehicle. And the same thing when I went to the Ontario Securities Commission, there's no way it's going to happen. So I was gathering this knowledge, and I discovered about Genesis mining, that there's 2 young mathematicians, one a PhD in theoretical physics, another one that finished university math in grade 10. He's 15 years old. He's finished University of Munich math, where Einstein was born. So you're talking about a very smart kid.
Yeah.
So my friend calls me, Frank Juster, said, my young guys, and he's betting on his young guys. I said, I'm betting on my young guys because my son and my godson are pushing me to learn this industry. I can't launch a product. I have all this new knowledge that's going nowhere. And all of a sudden, they have an opportunity to become the first miner. And they couldn't get institutional money. So I said, I went over to Zug. I went over to Munich. I vet them. I love them. There's such great integrity. I meet young billionaires that never show their wealth. There's no flash. Zero. That's a new millennial mode. They do not want to have all those Lamborghinis that are advertised, etc. That's maybe traders, but they're hippies. They're capitalist hippies.
Yeah.
And they want to lease. They want a good experience. They want to go to a good concert. They want to go and travel the world. This is what they want to do with their money. Complete different path. So we created a company called HIVE Blockchain, and I put $5 million into it and became the chairman. And within 3 weeks of going public last September, it became a unicorn. And it was the first vehicle that institutions could buy that they could have custody of, and we don't have an AML problem. You know why? Because we're mining in Iceland. We're mining in Sweden. We have geothermal, renewable green energy, and we are mining virgin coins. When you validate a Bitcoin transaction or validate an Ethereum transaction because you have the right chips, you have the cheap electricity, and you have the algorithm technology to do it, you get rewarded in new coins. That new coin, that first coin is called a Genesis coin. So I said, I'm all in. And it grew, and immediately institutions came and knocking on the door, and we raised in 3 months $200 million. And we have a planned build out, which is just phenomenal, going from basically using 2 megawatts of energy to 44 megawatts of energy, a 20-fold increase over 1 year. And then during that time period, we'll go from revenue in December. It's very volatile, the revenue. I'll comment on that later. But it was going to go from $1 million a month to $1 million a week. And by September, with where Ethereum and Bitcoin are today, we could be pushing $2 million a week or more and making $1 million a week. So it's a phenomenal event. And leaving the gold space, gold investors, the early adopters to Bitcoin, I found out, were gold investors. They didn't sell their gold to buy it. They loved the concept of decentralized, capped at 21 million coins. And when I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago, a very small group with Greenspan was speaking at, of IMF and gold, the World Gold Council, his comments were that if they stopped printing U.S. dollars, it would become volatile like Bitcoin. So, which I thought was really fascinating. And so that's what we're dealing with is the deflation of other paper currencies relative to Bitcoin. And so it wasn't hurting Bitcoin, but all these new ICOs coming out, and they were hurting the speculative money. Millennials are speculating. The regulatory world has chased away any speculative money to go into funds or investors or brokers pitching a deal. It's all retirement money, dividend paying blue chip money, the stuff that Warren Buffett relates to, not millennials. And there's speculation. And last year, $5 billion went into the speculation and creation of 1,000 new coins. So something else is evolving. Yes, there were scams there. Yes, there's lack of full, true, plain, and timely disclosure. And yes, I think it's good the SEC goes after those people that are saying, I'm a token, I'm a coin, but really it's another form of security, and they're deceiving the public to cheat them. I think we have to clean that up. But it's not going to change Bitcoin's ecosystem. It's not going to change the integrity of it, or it's going to change Ethereum. And so I'm very thrilled that we've basically, as I mentioned earlier, we should be up to close to 120 million in revenue with coins at these price levels, close to that level, and making $50 million of money, free cash flow.
Interesting.
So that's incredible business. I could never do that in the gold business, never. And the closest thing that comes to HIVE Blockchain are the royalty companies in the gold business, which I love. Franco-Nevada, Wheaton Precious Minerals, and you have Royal Gold. In my new ETF, they're 30%, 10% each, and they rebalance each quarter because they have a superior business model. We, by this time, 6 months from now, should be doing, based on the coin price today, we could be doing 10 million in revenue per employee.
Now,
Goldman Sachs, 1 million.
1 million. Wow. So clearly this technology is disrupting the banking sector, and there's a lot of speculating, as you mentioned earlier. Now, currently the market cap is close to around $400 billion. Where do you see it going? Has the real institutional money really got involved yet, or is it coming? Because I'm sure that plays into your business over at Hive and your revenue there. So are you looking forward to some fresh money coming in soon on the speculation side, or what?
Absolutely. We're on the road telling the story, like telling your followers the story. HIVE Blockchain is the first, and what it also triggered was 50 new companies went to Canada to get listed, went to try to raise money. It brought in $2 billion of funding that U.S. institutions would go into Canada to buy a new RTO, a new company in this space. Novacrats went and raised $250 million for his Goldman Sachs brokerage type of firm dedicated to the crypto world. He listed that in Canada. So it did usher in a brand new formation of capital, which prior to this was all owned by Silicon Valley or wealthy individuals. So now it's become more mainstream and anyone can participate in the opportunity. But Hive clearly generated in its first quarter a 36% return on capital in one quarter. This past quarter, it'll be lower because the coins were lower. All the scare of how much regulations are going to come in, etc., and tax filing, etc. So we had it depressed, but we produced more coins. So we're doing exactly what we said we would do. So when in that funding of raising $200 million in 2017 fourth quarter, we had 15 new institutions come in. Fidelity owns 10% of the company. So yes, we're getting more and more institutional sponsorship. Jeffries took the CEO, Harry Potter, around to visit all these institutions in New York and Boston. So we're knocking on the door, telling our story. It's a unique proposition. Now, what's really important to recognize, this is the risk. It's really volatile. It's volatile because the underlying currencies are volatile. So what do I mean by volatility? Is the DNA of volatility of gold on a day, 70% of the time, it's a non-event for gold to go up or down 1%. The S&P is exactly the same as bullion, exactly. The gold stocks and emerging markets are 2 times to 3 times the volatility of the S&P or bullion. So a gold stock's DNA volatility is 2 to 3%. Ethereum and Bitcoin daily is between 6 and 7%. Over any 2-week trading period, the volatility for Ethereum and Bitcoin is between 18 and 20%. So one has to be able to smart on buy on the down days when it's down more than 6% of Ethereum or Bitcoin. That's a better way to nibble, and because it has an impact on the stock also.
Interesting. Now, from a mining standpoint, what coins do you guys mine? Are you in the top 10 or so as far as market cap coins, or are you altcoins, or what coins do you guys mine? And can the public actually acquire them from you directly, or do we have to go through another intermediary type of thing like that?
Yeah, well, I think you have to go through another intermediary at this stage because we haven't finalized agreements. People have approached us for those virgin coins. But I think the best way is, you want to participate, you can buy the stock. It'll move with the Ethereum prices. We're predominantly mining Ethereum right now. And it's been our choice is because if Ethereum does go to proof of stake versus proof of work, then you put up all your coins and you earn a high rate of return on those coins. And so then, therefore, we can then pivot and mine other coins with our GPU cards. So for your listeners, you need an A6 chip to mine Bitcoin, and you need a graphics processing card to mine Ethereum. And also the 1,000 other new coins that have come out, they're basically on the Ethereum protocol. So more of those coins are being mined, the more we're going to be mining. So that's a part. So we predominantly have been in Ethereum Classic. We've been a miner off, and some of the other Zcash, some of the other ones, but predominantly in the top 10. But by September, when Sweden opens up, we will be doing Bitcoin. And so that's where we'll double our revenue. We recently announced something that's huge for us. I mean, huge. Most of these operations are 2 megawatts to 30 megawatts. When you're using 30 megawatts, that's a serious player. You're talking about 50 to 100 megawatts. Now you're an industrial, big industrial player. Well, what are we going to be going to? We just finalizing a deal in Norway for more than a gigawatt of energy. A gigawatt. So we believe it's a scramble for the ball, and then the ball is getting in areas where you can get inexpensive electricity under a nickel a kilowatt hour, in a safe jurisdiction, and it's geothermal or it's hydro, so it's green energy. You do not want to be where it's coal, and that's the biggest complaint about Bitcoin mining from China is the energy is predominantly comes from coal, which is polluting all of Asia.
Yeah. Wow. Interesting there. That's some very good information there with Hive. So earlier you hinted at the idea that this past week you're at the Consensus Conference. So what was the theme? What was the overall tone of that? I know that they've had 8,500 people, all-time records. So what's the vibe coming from that conference since it's creating so much media hype?
This time last year we had the coins rising. This time this year, from January 1, we have the coins falling. They're down. But the volume of people attending doubled. Now that's big.
Yeah.
The room for launching a fund, all the fund-related issues, standing room only. Over 3,500 people in that standing auditorium. I mean, unbelievable. 8,500 people and buzz and booths everywhere. I've never seen it. But the biggest players there in booth size was Microsoft and IBM. Blue chip companies. They're the mainstay players. So I thought that was interesting. The other part was interesting to me was a high percentage of women. I would say 40% were women. Most investment conferences, ETF conferences I attend, theme industry, golden conference I attend, it's dominated by men. This ecosystem is all ages, all genders. There's a podium of 4 women at one podium, and they're all Americans originally from India. Talking regarding this space, so it's a really, and the room was packed with almost 3,000 people late in the day. So there is something else happening in this world outside of mainstream America, and I think that's the real significant factor that for people to appreciate. It's not your everyday news item. And last year it went from positive, it's hot and cold from the media, whereas from TED Talks, it's all positive. Yeah. TED Talks had 1 billion followers now, and it's capped at 18 minutes. Many of the based on MRI machines because people can't concentrate longer than 18 minutes. Here you have pages of TED Talks on blockchain and cryptocurrency, and nothing on gold. That was another wake-up call for me, and it's been going on for years. So this is a big thing happening. Of how many people showed up, other news of banks getting in the business, trading, a settlement on securities taking place. I mean, it's a revolution taking place on trading. The first cycle was trading of information. The next cycle is trading of value, and we're in the midst of it.
Well, interesting. Frank Holmes from HIVE Blockchain Technology. So you guys are listed on the Toronto Stock Exchange. Can you give us your ticker there so people can do more research and find out how to get involved? And where can they find more of your information? I'll make sure to link it down below as well.
HIVE, hive.v for the Canadian market, and over the counter it's HVBTF, F for being a foreign security. It's very liquid. It's also listed in Germany. I can't give you the ticker up there, but some days it trades up to 500,000 shares. It's a very liquid name for investors, both retail or institutional.
Interesting. Sounds good. So thank you once again for sharing that information there on the Consensus as well as what's going on with Hive. Definitely myself look forward to diving more into the investment space with cryptocurrency because I am aware of it because a lot of my audience are excited about it. So it's here to stay. And so definitely it should be interesting to see how the market cap continues to fluctuate, but yet ultimately reach back that new high. Do you see us reaching that 800 or so billion dollars like we did?
No. I think we go through that. No one has a gigawatt of energy. It's a scramble. I told you, it's really important for your listeners to understand. It's a loose ball.
Yeah.
And dive for the ball. Don't look at it. Dive. So right now the world is diving to get that ball in Norway, Sweden, any place where there's safe, clean energy. In northern Quebec, Manitoba, it's really important because the world's going to need, Google's going to need this space, Facebook's going to need this space. Animation for our GPU cards, we're finding out that all the animated movies have to do rendering. So the longevity of our GPU card was supposed to be 3 to 5 years, could be 7 years now. Global gaming. Then we have the other factors growing is artificial intelligence. 1.5 billion in Silicon Valley years going into artificial intelligence. They're going to need GPU cards to be able to give you that data, to give you an end game. So we have long-term life. So I think that our data centers have unique value proposition.
Interesting. Well, Frank Holmes from HIVE Blockchain, thank you for sitting down with us and Rethinking the Dollar, sharing your thoughts on precious metals as well as this exciting space in the crypto sector. Looking forward to continue to follow what you're doing. And other than that, keep doing what you're doing. I'm also going to subscribe to your newsletter so I can stay informed as well. So looking forward to find out more about world events. So once again, thank you.
USfunds.com.
USfunds.com. Thank you. Well, Frank, enjoy the rest of your day. Look forward to staying in tune with you, buddy. Thank you.
All right. Cheers.